When I purchased my dream home in Oakwood Estates last spring, I thought I'd struck gold. The neighborhood was pristine, manicured lawns, spotless sidewalks, and a community pool that looked straight out of a resort brochure. The cherry on top, my backyard came with a private hot tub nestled under a wooden pergola draped with fairy lights. After 5 years of 80-hour weeks as an orthopedic surgeon, I had finally earned my sanctuary. What the realtor conveniently glossed over was Oakwood's Homeowners Association, specifically its president, Deborah Winters. Just standard stuff, my realtor had said with a wave of her hand. Paint colors, lawn maintenance, the usual. The $450 monthly HOA fee seemed steep, but with amenities like a pool, tennis courts, and landscaping, I figured it was worth it. At the closing, I received a 3-ream binder containing the HOA bylaws minus 172 pages of single-spaced regulations governing everything from the acceptable height of garden gnomes, none permitted, to the precise shade of white for exterior window trim, eggshell, not ivory. I skimmed it, signed where indicated, and tossed it onto a shelf. My first HOA meeting should have been a warning. Deborah, or Deb, as she insisted while simultaneously making it clear no one was actually permitted to call her that, ran the meeting with the precision of a military operation. She was in her mid-50s with an immaculate blonde bob that didn't move when she spoke, wore pastel cardigans regardless of season, and had a smile that never reached her eyes. "We're just one big family here," she announced to the room of 30 homeowners, her gaze fixed on me, the newcomer, a family with standards. As I was leaving, I noticed a small group of residents huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Johnson, caught my eye and gave me a look that seemed almost sympathetic. The following morning, I found my first warning letter taped to my door. The offense? My mailbox was approximately 0.75 inches lower than the mandated height, according to Section 14, Paragraph 7 of the Oakwood Estates Community Standards. I had 48 hours to correct the issue or face a $75 fine. I should have run then, but I'd already signed my life away on a 30-year mortgage. 2 weeks after adjusting my mailbox height, twice, because the first adjustment was insufficient, my first real HOA violation notice came. The offense? My garbage can remain visible from the street for approximately 46 minutes after the mandated retrieval time of 7:00 p.m. on collection day. The notice included a $50 fine and a highlighted copy of Section 23, Paragraph 4 of the Waste Management Bylaws. I'd been in emergency surgery all day and had rushed home to move my garbage can, arriving at 7:46 p.m. Apparently, someone had been watching, stopwatch in hand. I called the HOA office the next morning to explain and request the fine be waived. "Rules are rules, Dr. Mitchell," Deborah said icily. "Without them, we descend into chaos. Besides, we've had issues with wildlife getting into trash cans left out overnight." It was 46 minutes, not overnight, I countered, and I was saving someone's knee. "Well," she replied, "perhaps in the future you can arrange for a neighbor to retrieve your can when you're indisposed." I decided to appeal the fine at the next HOA meeting. Big mistake. The Oakwood Estates community room was painfully bright, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. 30 homeowners sat in uncomfortable folding chairs, arranged in perfect rows. I noticed several people checking their watches. Deborah's meetings were known to run precisely 90 minutes, not a minute more or less. I had arrived early to secure a seat near the front, clutching my folder of evidence, hospital records confirming my emergency surgery, a written statement from the chief of orthopedics, even a thank you card from my patient. Surely reasonable people would understand. When my appeal came up on the agenda, Deborah's smile tightened. Now we have Dr. Mitchell's complaint about his waste management violation. Before I could speak, she dimmed the lights and launched into a PowerPoint presentation titled "The Importance of Waste Management Compliance." The slides featured zoomed in photos of my garbage can at various timestamps: 7:01 p.m., 7:23 p.m., 7:46 p.m. each image more damning than the last. The final slide showed a raccoon near someone's trash can, clearly not mine, with the caption, "What happens when we ignore the rules?" As you can see, Deborah concluded, this is a matter of community safety and aesthetics. When I finally got to present my case, the fluorescent lights were switched back on, making me squint awkwardly. "I understand the importance of rules," I began, but I was performing emergency surgery on a 16-year-old athlete whose knee was shattered in a car accident. "I came home as soon as possible. Surely there's room for extenuating circumstances." From the back row, someone muttered, "My sister-in-law had her knee replaced, and she was walking the same day." Deborah nodded sympathetically. "While we appreciate Dr. Mitchell's profession, the bylaws clearly state that exceptions require pre-approval via Form 23B, which should be submitted at least 48 hours in advance." "I couldn't have known I'd have an emergency surgery," I protested. "Then perhaps you should have a contingency plan in place," suggested Jenkins, the HOA vice president, who I'd later learn was Deborah's second cousin. "My wife and I have a neighborhood teenager on retainer for just such occasions." The board voted 4-1 against me, with only Mrs. Johnson dissenting. As people filed out, I noticed several neighbors avoiding eye contact. As I was leaving, Deborah placed a hand on my arm. "You know, Dr. Mitchell, life in Oakwood can be quite pleasant for those who understand how things work here. I'd hate for your adjustment period to be unnecessarily difficult." Her perfectly manicured nails dug slightly into my skin as she added, "By the way, your azaleas are lovely, but they're the wrong shade of pink for your south-facing exposure. You'll find the approved color palette for botanical specimens in Section 42 of the bylaws." I paid the fine that evening, fuming but determined not to let Deborah get under my skin. Little did I know that my garbage can violation was merely the opening skirmish in what would become a suburban Cold War. That night, I dreamed of my beautiful azaleas being ripped from the ground by an army of clipboard-wielding Deborahs. When I awoke the next morning, I found a glossy brochure in my mailbox for Winter's Landscaping Solutions, Deborah's brother-in-law's company. I would later learn, with a handwritten note, approved contractors make compliance so much easier. The battle lines were drawn, and I was just beginning to understand the enemy I was facing. Over the next few months, the violations piled up like autumn leaves. A garden hose improperly coiled, $25. Christmas lights still up on January 2nd, $100. And my personal favorite, a yellow sticky note on my door citing my grass as 5.27 inches tall when the bylaw clearly stated a 5-inch maximum, $75. I began to suspect Deborah was personally measuring my lawn with a ruler. What started as annoying became genuinely disturbing when I realized how closely I was being monitored. One Friday evening, I received an email violation for unauthorized automotive maintenance with a $150 fine. I had changed my windshield wiper in my driveway that afternoon, a task that took all of 3 minutes. Someone had photographed me doing it. "This is getting ridiculous," I muttered to myself as I checked my mailbox one evening, finding yet another violation notice. "Don't say that too loudly," came a voice behind me. "She has ears everywhere." I turned to find Mrs. Johnson, a small tin of cookies in her hands. "These are for you," she said. "Snickerdoodles, my grandson's favorite." Then, more quietly, "We need to talk." "Not here. Come by tomorrow, after dark." The next evening, the Johnsons welcomed me into their immaculate living room. Their house was exactly what you'd expect from a retired couple. Comfortable furniture, framed photos of children and grandchildren, and a prominent display of Mr. Johnson's bowling trophies. But something else caught my eye. A thick binder labeled HOA NCIDNTs 2018 to 2023, sitting prominently on their coffee table. "You're not the first, you know," Mrs. Johnson said, passing me a cup of tea. "The Hendersons before you, the Paddles before them. Anyone who stands up to Deborah becomes a target." Mr. Johnson nodded gravely. 3 families have sold at a loss in the past year alone. Most people just give up. But why does the board let her get away with it? I asked, flipping through their meticulously documented instances of HOA overreach. The Johnsons exchanged a look. "Follow the money," Mr. Johnson said quietly, opening his laptop. "The HOA budget has nearly doubled in 5 years, but services have decreased. Look at this." He showed me spreadsheets tracking HOA expenses, line items like community events that mysteriously cost 3 times industry standard, landscaping services with inflated charges, and administrative fees that had grown 400% since Deborah took over. Deborah's event planning company handles all community functions, Mrs. Johnson explained. Her brother-in-law's construction firm gets all maintenance contracts. Her college roommate handles the HOA's legal work. A chill ran down my spine. Is anyone else aware of this? A few, Mr. Johnson replied, but most homeowners don't attend meetings or review financial statements. They just pay their dues and look the other way when Deborah's targets get pushed out. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an email. A certified letter awaited me at the HOA office. I was being fined $350 for unauthorized landscape alterations. I had planted a small herb garden, rosemary, basil, and mint, in a corner of my backyard, completely out of sight from the street. "This can't be legal," I said, showing them the email. Mrs. Johnson's eyes narrowed. "It's not about legality. It's about wearing you down, making you so miserable you'll either conform or leave." The next day, when I called to protest the herb garden fine, Deborah's assistant informed me that all plant life required pre-approval and submission of a vegetation modification form, complete with soil phase testing and drainage impact statements. "The form costs $75 to process," she added cheerfully, "and takes 4 to 6 weeks for review." That weekend, I spotted Mrs. Johnson at the community mailboxes. "They've targeted my rose bushes now," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. 40 years I've been growing them, and suddenly they're non-compliant species." I was no longer alone in this fight, but that didn't make it any easier. The fines were adding up, and I began to understand how the HOA could force homeowners to sell. It wasn't just the money, it was the constant stress, the feeling of being watched, the helplessness. As I drove home that evening, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across from my house. A woman inside appeared to be taking photos with a telescopic lens. When I slowed down, she quickly drove away. I checked my security cameras that night. 3 different people had walked by my house in the past week, each pausing to take pictures or notes. One was Jenkins, the HOA vice president. Another was Deborah's sister. The third was a man I'd never seen before, wearing what looked suspiciously like a county inspector's jacket. They weren't just monitoring me anymore. They were building a case against me. But for what? I was about to find out in the most invasive way possible. My breaking point came on a Saturday evening in July. I had just completed a 36-hour shift at the hospital. A multi-car pileup had brought in 7 patients requiring orthopedic surgery, and I'd been on my feet for almost the entire time. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned, and all I wanted was a glass of wine and my bed. As I turned onto my street, something felt off. Mrs. Peterson, who normally waved from her garden, quickly averted her eyes. Mr. Grayson, washing his car, suddenly became very interested in his wheel rims. It was as if the entire neighborhood was collectively holding its breath. I noticed my side gate was slightly ajar, just an inch or 2, but I distinctly remembered latching it that morning. As I approached my back patio, I heard laughter and splashing. 4 strangers were in my hot tub, 2 middle-aged couples, cocktails in hand, music playing from a portable speaker. They froze when they saw me, except for one woman who smiled and waved as if I were the unexpected visitor. "You must be Dr. Mitchell. I'm Deborah from the HOA. We're just breaking in your beautiful spa. Hope you don't mind. The community pool is closed for cleaning." I stood there, stethoscope still around my neck, utterly dumbfounded. Deborah Winters was in my hot tub with 3 strangers, drinking my alcohol. I spotted my distinctive blue bottle of gin on the side table, using my towels, as if this were completely normal behavior. "Actually, I do mind. I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. This is private property, not a community amenity. Deborah's smile didn't falter. Oh, but according to Bylaw 34.2, all water features visible from common areas can be designated for community use during pool maintenance periods. One of the men, clearly uncomfortable, started to stand. Deb, you said you had permission. I do. She cut him off sharply. Section 34.2 is quite clear. That's absurd, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm calling the police. I wouldn't, Deborah replied, her voice hardening. That would be a violation of Bylaw 17.8 regarding hostile actions against HOA officials conducting official business. The fine is $500, plus potential legal fees. The other couples exchanged nervous glances, gathering their things. This is my private property, I repeated, more forcefully. Please leave immediately. The guests hurriedly exited the hot tub, mumbling apologies, but Deborah remained, swirling the water with her manicured hand. You know, Dr. Mitchell, as a newcomer, you might want to read the bylaws more carefully. Being uncooperative with the HOA can lead to all sorts of complications. When they finally left, I immediately grabbed my HOA binder and checked every page. No such provision as Bylaw 34.2 existed regarding water features. No Bylaw 17.8 about hostile actions. Deborah had flat out lied to justify trespassing on my property. I changed the lock on my gate that night, installed security cameras, and called my lawyer. Mark Daniels specialized in property law and had handled several HOA cases. This is egregious, he said after hearing my story, but not surprising. HOAs operate in this gray area where they have significant power with minimal oversight. So they can just enter my property whenever they want? I asked incredulously. No, absolutely not, Mark assured me. That's trespassing, plain and simple. But here's where it gets tricky. If the HOA bylaws include provisions for maintenance inspections, which most do, Deborah could claim she was conducting an inspection of my hot tub, with guests, drinking my alcohol. Mark's pause told me everything. Document everything. Set up those cameras. Keep a detailed log. We're going to need evidence of a pattern. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me wonder if Deborah was back, prowling around my property. I reviewed the security footage from the past week and discovered something disturbing. This wasn't the first time my gate had been opened while I was away. 3 times in the past 2 weeks, someone had entered my backyard. I just hadn't noticed the signs. My home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a battleground. And I had just installed my first line of defense. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. I was being fined $750 for unauthorized security modifications to my property. The lock on my gate and the newly installed cameras were apparently violations of the architectural standards. The letter concluded with a chilling statement. Additionally, the board requires a key to all external access points for emergency purposes. Failure to provide said key within 72 hours will result in a daily fine of $100. They weren't just invading my privacy. They were demanding the legal right to do so. This wasn't just about a hot tub anymore. This was war. The following week, I received a notice of an emergency HOA meeting to discuss improper security modifications to common areas. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Tuesday, precisely when I was slated to perform a complex spinal surgery that had been on the books for months. Coincidence? Hardly. I arranged for a colleague to take my evening rounds and left the hospital the moment my patient was safely in recovery. As I rushed into the community center at 8:15 p.m., all heads turned. Deborah's smile was particularly venomous. How kind of you to join us, Dr. Mitchell. We've already voted on your situation. The room was packed, not just with the usual board loyalists, but with homeowners I'd never seen at meetings before. Many looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Johnson sat in the corner, her expression grim. I'd like to know what was decided about my property, I said, still in my surgical scrubs. And I'd like the minutes to reflect that I was in surgery. saving a 16-year-old girl's spine, which is why I'm late. Deborah's smile didn't waver. The board has determined that your unauthorized security modifications, specifically your cameras and gate lock, violate Section 28 of the Architectural Standards. You've been fined $750, as previously communicated. Additionally, Jenkins added, you'll need to provide the HOA with a key to your gate for emergency access within 72 hours, or face daily fines. May I see this Section 28? I asked. Deborah slid a binder across the table. The relevant section referred to visible modifications affecting community aesthetic standards. My cameras and lock were black, mounted discreetly, and barely visible from outside the property. This doesn't apply to my modifications, I stated. They don't impact any aesthetic standards. The board disagrees, Deborah replied coldly. We've already voted 4-1. I'd like to present evidence, I said, pulling out my phone. I have photos showing my security installations are minimally visible and match the existing hardware. I also have documentation of trespassing on my property, which necessitated these security measures. The agenda item has been closed, Deborah said, rapping her gavel. Next item, community pool maintenance schedule. As the meeting continued, I felt a tap on my shoulder. A man I didn't recognize slipped me a folded note. Meet us at the Johnsons after. We're on your side. My lawyer had advised me to comply temporarily while building our case. Give them the key, but make sure your cameras are recording 24/7, he'd said. We need to prove a pattern of harassment and abuse of power. After the meeting, 14 homeowners crowded into the Johnsons' living room. These weren't just disgruntled neighbors. They were professionals with skills. An accountant who'd been reviewing HOA financial records, a retired police officer who understood trespassing laws, a contractor who knew the real costs of the maintenance projects Deborah's brother-in-law had been overcharging for. We've been waiting for someone like you, Mrs. Johnson explained. Someone they couldn't easily intimidate. Someone with resources to fight back. The accountant, Mr. Patel, spread spreadsheets on the coffee table. Look at these numbers. The miscellaneous entertainment fund has grown from $2,000 to over $30,000 annually, with no clear accounting. Fines collected have tripled, yet the reserve fund for actual maintenance has decreased. And this, added the contractor, Ms. Rodriguez, pointing to invoices. These bathroom renovations at the clubhouse, they charged the HOA $42,000 for work that should cost $15,000 at most. I showed them my security footage of Deborah using my hot tub with paying guests. The retired officer, Mr. Grant, shook his head. That's criminal trespass and possibly fraud if she's charging people for access. We were building a case, but I knew HOA litigation could drag on for years. I needed something more immediate, especially when my security app chimed again that night, showing Deborah leading another group of guests to my hot tub while I was at the Johnsons. She's back at my house right now, I said incredulously, showing them my phone. Even after tonight's meeting, Mrs. Johnson's eyes narrowed. She thinks she's untouchable, that no one will stand up to her. Mr. Grant studied the footage. Classic pattern of escalation. She's daring you to confront her again. I had the evidence for eventual legal victory, but Deborah seemed determined to make my life hell in the meantime. The next morning, another violation notice appeared, this time claiming my medical waste disposal, a properly sealed sharps container for the occasional injection I gave myself for a chronic condition, violated environmental regulations. The fines were adding up, and my lawyer warned that HOAs in our state had significant power to place liens on properties. I could win eventually, but Deborah might bankrupt me first. I needed a more immediate solution, something that would catch her red-handed, or perhaps, as I was beginning to imagine, purple-handed. Labor Day weekend was supposed to be special. I was hosting my parents for the first time since moving in, excited to show them my new home despite the HOA nightmare. I'd cleaned every corner, stocked the fridge with their favorite foods, and even risked a $200 unauthorized holiday decoration fine by placing a small American flag near my front door. Just be normal, I whispered to myself as I picked them up from the airport. Don't turn this into 3 days of HOA horror stories. My father, a retired judge, immediately noticed the tension in my shoulders as I gave them a tour of the house. Something's bothering you, son, and it's not just surgical fatigue. Over dinner, I tried to keep conversation light, but when my phone repeatedly chimed with security alerts from neighbors watching for Deborah's movements, my mother raised an eyebrow. Are you in some kind of trouble? She asked. The dam broke. I showed them the binder of violations, the financial records, the security footage of Deborah's repeated trespassing. My father's expression darkened with each new revelation. This is criminal, he said finally. Trespass, fraud, possibly embezzlement. I know, I sighed. My lawyer says we have a case, but it could take years. We were enjoying dessert on the patio when my security app alerted me to movement at my gate. On my phone screen, I watched in disbelief as Deborah led a group of 5 people, none of whom lived in Oakwood Estates, through my gate and directly to my hot tub. They carried coolers and bags, clearly planning an extended stay. Is that happening right now? My mother asked, peering over my shoulder at the screen. I nodded, a cold fury settling in my chest. They think I'm out with you too because I filed a guest parking notification for your rental car. My father stood up. I'd like to meet this HOA president of yours. Heart pounding, I led my confused parents through the house to the back door. There, in living color, was Deborah Winters and her paying guests, already slipping into my hot tub with drinks in hand. Oh, you're home, she said, genuine surprise crossing her face. The office showed your guest notification, but we didn't see any cars in the driveway, so we assumed you'd gone out. My parents parked in the garage, I replied coldly. Why are you in my backyard again? We're conducting the quarterly water safety inspection, she said smoothly. It's on the community calendar. One of her guests, already half undressed, looked confused. I thought you said this was the community spa that residents could reserve. My father stepped forward, his judicial demeanor in full effect. Young lady, I believe that constitutes criminal trespass and fraud. Shall we call the police, or would you prefer to leave quietly? Deborah's smile flickered. And you are? Judge Robert Mitchell, retired from the Ninth Circuit. And more relevantly, a homeowner's father witnessing flagrant abuse of HOA authority. They left, but not before Deborah hissed, "You've just made a very powerful enemy, Doctor." Once they were gone, my mother looked shocked. Has this happened before? I showed them the security footage from previous weeks. Deborah had used my hot tub 3 more times while I was at work, sometimes alone, sometimes with groups of people who clearly paid her for the private spa experience. She's renting out your property, my father asked incredulously. That's criminal. The next morning, a certified letter arrived by special Saturday delivery. The board was initiating foreclosure proceedings against my home for persistent and willful violations of community standards. The letter listed $4,750 in unpaid fines, most of which I'd never even been notified about. My father made some calls to former colleagues in the local legal community. This is a textbook case of HOA overreach, he reported, but Deborah has connections with the county recorder's office. Her college roommate works there. They've done this before, pushed people out through trumped-up fines and quick foreclosures. My parents had to return home that evening, but my father left me with 2 things: the contact information for a specialized HOA attorney who had successfully taken down corrupt boards in 3 counties, and a piece of advice that would change everything. In court, you need ironclad evidence, he said, the kind that can't be explained away. When I was on the bench, the cases that always stuck were the ones where the perpetrator was caught, as they say, red-handed. A light bulb went off in my head. Red-handed, or perhaps purple-handed. That night, I took a medical leave of absence, my first in 5 years. I needed time to implement what would become known throughout Oakwood Estates as the Purple Operation. Our plan required precise timing and a bit of medical creativity. I spent the next week preparing, ordering specialty items online and having them delivered to my office rather than my home. I couldn't risk Deborah or her spies intercepting packages or spotting unusual deliveries. The crown jewel of my preparations arrived in an unmarked medical supply box, a special solution of gentian violet dye used for certain dermatological procedures, completely harmless but remarkably persistent, and FDA approved, which would be important later if questions arose. The unique property that made it perfect for my purposes. It was undetectable when dissolved but would react with skin oils upon contact with hot water, becoming visible only after 2 to 3 hours of exposure to air. "Are you sure this isn't going too far?" Mrs. Johnson asked when I explained the plan to our core group of allies. "Is it too far to stop someone who's trespassing on my property and trying to steal my home through fraudulent fines?" I countered, "This won't hurt anyone. It's just going to make certain activities very visible." Mr. Grant, our retired police officer, chuckled. "In my day, we called this marking the bills. You're just marking the trespassers." I modified my work schedule to appear predictable, leaving and returning at the same times each day. Neighbors reported that Deborah had been watching my house, noting my patterns, likely planning her next spa party. On social media, I posted about an upcoming medical conference in Chicago, complete with fake hotel reservations and flight details. I made sure to mention it within earshot of Deborah's closest board ally during a community garden session. 3 days of orthopedic lectures. I sighed dramatically. Not how I choose to spend a weekend, but duty calls. Meanwhile, the Johnsons helped spread rumors of a high-end spa party happening at my address Friday night, just vague enough to pique Deborah's interest without revealing too much. I heard someone's paying $500 a person. Mrs. Peterson whispered loudly to Mr. Jenkins at the mailboxes. Something about an exclusive therapeutic experience. The pieces were falling into place. The evening before my trip, I noticed Deborah's car driving slowly past my house 3 times. The Friday before my trip, I set the final pieces in motion. First, I added the special solution to my hot tub, carefully measuring the concentration. I tested it with a drop on my finger, no visible color, but when exposed to heat and then air, a distinctive purple appeared and remained for days despite scrubbing. Next, I adjusted my security cameras to automatically upload footage to a cloud server and my attorney's inbox if triggered. I also installed a small waterproof camera disguised as a decorative element on the hot tub itself, capturing faces from an angle impossible to dispute later. Finally, I left conspicuous evidence of my departure, closed blinds, a pile of mail by the door, and my car absent from the driveway, parked at a colleague's house down the street. Our allies took their positions. A reporter from the local newspaper, a college friend of Mrs. Johnson's daughter, waited in her car down the street, ready with a photographer. We'd shown her some of our evidence, and she was eager for a story on HOA corruption. Mr. Grant and 2 other neighbors positioned themselves strategically around the block, connected by text message and ready to serve as witnesses. Mrs. Peterson's teenage son, an aspiring filmmaker, was stationed in a tree with a high-definition camera. Then I waited in my darkened living room, a perfect view of the backyard through my blinds. The house was silent except for the soft bubbling of the hot tub, a siren song for Deborah and her paying clients. My phone vibrated with a text from Mrs. Johnson. "Eagle has left the nest. 6 passengers in tow. Heading your way." I felt a surge of adrenaline stronger than any I'd experienced in the operating room. After months of harassment, violations, and trespassing, Deborah was about to experience some consequences, very purple consequences. At precisely 7:30 p.m., my security app alerted me to movement at my gate. Through the camera, I watched Deborah lead a group of 6 well-dressed individuals into my backyard. They carried champagne bottles and wore plush robes over swimwear. "Welcome to Oakwood's exclusive executive spa," I heard Deborah announce through the audio feed. As I mentioned, this is normally reserved for our Platinum community members, but tonight we have special access. One man handed Deborah what appeared to be cash. "This better be worth $500, Deb." "Trust me," she replied. "Our resident doctor spared no expense on this setup." top-of-the-line jets, color-changing lights, the works. And he's away until Tuesday, medical conference in Chicago. I texted the group. They're in. All 6 of them plus Deborah. Mrs. Johnson replied, "Reporter is ready. Get the money shot." I waited, heart pounding, as they settled in, pouring champagne into my glassware, stolen from my outdoor cabinet, turning on my sound system, and gradually disrobing to reveal swimwear beneath their robes. Once they were all in the water, glasses raised in a toast to Deborah's entrepreneurial spirit, I knew it was time. The trap was set, the bait taken, and the purple surprise was already working its invisible magic on their skin. I took a deep breath and moved toward the back door. It was showtime. The weeks following what the local paper dubbed the Oakwood Purple Incident were a whirlwind of activity. The HOA audit revealed the full extent of Deborah's financial misconduct. Over $120,000 embezzled from HOA funds over 4 years, kickbacks from contractors, and unauthorized entertainment fees charged to the community for her personal events. More shocking was the discovery that this wasn't her first rodeo. Deborah had served on 3 other HOA boards in neighboring counties, each time leaving amid vague personal reasons, after approximately 4 years, just before financial audits were scheduled. She's been running this scam for over a decade, the forensic accountant told us, moving from community to community, setting up the same schemes. The criminal investigation expanded beyond Oakwood Estates. A detective interviewed me in my living room, beside the now infamous hot tub. "This purple dye thing," he said, shaking his head with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "I've been in law enforcement 20 years and never seen anything like it. We've got people walking into the station with purple patches confessing to trespassing and fraud because they think we already know." The case against Deborah was ironclad. Security footage, financial records, and a parade of purple witnesses made charges of trespassing, fraud, and embezzlement impossible to dispute. Her attorney attempted to claim the dye was tampering with evidence, or entrapment, but since it was FDA approved, completely harmless, and used on my own private property that she had illegally entered, these arguments fell flat. Deborah listed her house for sale the same week, but found few takers. Who would buy from someone whose purple-tinged mugshot was on the front page of the local paper? She eventually sold it at a significant loss and moved to another state. The community underwent its own transformation. The new board, led by Mrs. Johnson as interim president, slashed monthly dues by 30% while actually increasing services. Landscaping costs dropped by half once competitive bidding was required. The community newsletter, previously a dry listing of violations and rules, became a vibrant connection point between neighbors. At a special community meeting, I was nominated to join the new HOA board. "You've done enough," I protested. "I'm not really a regulations person." "That's exactly why we need you," Mrs. Johnson said, "to keep us in check." My first motion as a board member was to reduce the bylaws from 172 pages to 15, focusing on genuine community needs rather than micromanagement. The motion passed unanimously. That summer, Oakwood Estates held its first community barbecue in 5 years. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now chatted easily. Children played across adjoining lawns without fear of unauthorized cross-property recreation violations. The event culminated in the ceremonial burning of the old HOA bylaws in the community fire pit, with proper permits, of course. My hot tub remains private, though I do host regular neighborhood socials on my patio, with open invitations for residents to join me for supervised soaks afterward. The purple dye, however, has been permanently retired. 6 months later, an envelope arrived bearing an Arizona postmark. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a new HOA president in a Phoenix suburb who had revolutionized community fundraising through exclusive member events. The photo showed a familiar blonde bob, though the name was different. I made a few calls, spoke with my lawyer, and sent a package to the Arizona HOA board containing copies of the court documents, newspaper clippings, and a small vial of clear liquid labeled "just in case." 2 weeks later, that HOA president abruptly resigned. Sometimes justice isn't just served, it's served with a colorful twist. And sometimes the mere threat of turning purple is enough to keep the Deborahs of the world in check. As Mr. Grant likes to say at our monthly board meetings, raising his glass in a toast, here's to communities that stick together without the use of adhesives, purple or otherwise, which would violate Section 3, Paragraph 2 of our new, improved, and wonderfully abbreviated bylaws. ## Part 8, Justice and Purple. The emergency board meeting the next morning had record attendance. Every seat was filled, with residents standing along the walls of the community center. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood grapevine. Deborah was conspicuously absent. In her place, Vice President Jenkins called the meeting to order, his hands shoved deep in his pockets despite the warm room. I noticed he had called in sick to avoid showing his face publicly, but couldn't miss this meeting. From where I sat, I could see purple stains around his hairline that his hasty self-tanner application hadn't quite covered. We're here to address serious allegations regarding the conduct of certain board members. Jenkins began, voice strained. Dr. Mitchell has provided documentation that requires our immediate attention. I stood up, laptop in hand, and walked to the podium. As I connected my computer to the projector, whispers rippled through the crowd. Several people were pointing at Jenkins' hands, which had slipped out of his pockets to reveal unmistakable purple fingertips. My presentation was concise and devastating. First, I displayed financial records showing discrepancies in HOA funds, highlighting how the miscellaneous entertainment fund had grown from $2,000 to over $30,000 annually under Deborah's presidency with no clear accounting. Next came security footage of Deborah using my property without permission, followed by recordings of her charging guests for access to what she called the executive spa experience. Last night, I said, displaying time-stamped images from my security cameras, Mrs. Winters collected $3,000 from 6 individuals for unauthorized use of my private hot tub, falsely representing it as a community amenity. The front door burst open and all heads turned. A reporter from the local newspaper entered, accompanied by a photographer. They quickly took seats in the back, notebooks ready. Jenkins tried to object to their presence, but Mrs. Johnson stood up. The bylaws clearly state that meetings are open to the public unless a privacy vote is taken, which requires 48 hours notice. I continued presenting testimonials from former residents about similar experiences, emails from contractors confirming that Winters Hospitality Solutions had received every HOA contract without competitive bidding, and documentation of the backdated inspection forms. As I spoke, more purple-tinged individuals slipped into the meeting, Deborah's guests from the previous night, looking mortified and furious in equal measure. In conclusion, I said, I believe the evidence shows a clear pattern of HOA funds being misappropriated, bylaws being selectively enforced to harass certain residents, and private property being illegally accessed and rented out for personal profit. The room erupted in angry murmurs. One woman stood up, pulling off her gloves to reveal bright purple hands. I paid $500 to use what I was told was a community spa last night. Mrs. Winters assured us it was legitimate. Another man, a local business owner with poorly concealed purple patches on his neck, added, she's been running these exclusive spa nights for months. Different houses, but Dr. Mitchell's was presented as the premium location. Mrs. Johnson rose slowly from her seat. I moved for an immediate vote to remove Deborah Winters from the HOA board and to conduct a full audit of HOA finances for the past 5 years. The motion passed unanimously. As the meeting dispersed, a police officer entered. He approached Jenkins, who had been trying to slip out unnoticed. Sir, we need to take your statement regarding some financial irregularities at Oakwood Estates. The reporter caught me at the door. Dr. Mitchell, can you explain the purple discoloration affecting several individuals here today? I smiled. Medical-grade dye, completely harmless, but remarkably persistent, just like the residents of Oakwood Estates when faced with corruption. The next day's headline read, HOA scandal turns purple. President's criminal scheme exposed by doctor's dye job. The aftermath unfolded better than I could have hoped. The audit revealed Deborah had embezzled over $120,000 from HOA funds over 4 years. She had also been running a lucrative side business renting out homes and amenities while owners were away, collecting thousands in private access fees. Criminal charges were filed. Most of her clients, still sporting various shades of purple, came forward with evidence once they realized they'd been duped into trespassing. Deborah listed her house for sale the same week, but found few takers once the story broke. She eventually sold it at a significant loss and moved to another state, leaving behind a legacy captured perfectly in the community newsletter's headline, "Purple Reign of Terror Ends at Oakwood Estates." As for me, I was elected to the new HOA board, where my first motion was to reduce the bylaws from 172 pages to 15, focusing on genuine community needs rather than micromanagement. My hot tub remains private, though I do host regular neighborhood socials on my patio, with open invitations for residents to join me for supervised soaks afterward. The purple dye, however, has been permanently retired. Sometimes justice isn't just served. It's served with a colorful twist. And Deborah? Last I heard, she was trying to join another HOA board in Arizona. I sent them an anonymous care package, a bottle of my special purple dye and a note, just in case history tries to repeat itself. HOA Karen snuck her guests into my hot tub, so I turned it into a purple surprise.